There are many homeschoolers all throughout the country, and they're booming, and they're successful, and there's a reason they're booming. But the problem is we have some states trying to aggressively attack homeschooling in dastardly ways, and the state of California is one of those. We're going to talk about this in the second half of the show about present pending legislation that could have a long-term major negative impact on the rights of parents to homeschool their kids. But the first half of the show, I want to talk about something very positive that I know you're going to be encouraged to hear about. We hear all about, attacks on parents by social workers, trying to control them, trying to put more and more constraints on parents and how they raise their children, where they let their kids go or don't go. Well, this is becoming very problematic. Well, one legislator in the state of Utah, Lincoln Fillmore, has drafted legislation that recently became law that is a breath of fresh air. And I was so glad to hear about this. I had thought, I've got to have Lincoln Fillmore on my show. Lincoln, thank you for being joining us here on the Dacus Report.
Thank you, Brad. It's good to be with you.
Well, and it's good to have you on the show. Now, you have a problem in Utah, like many states have had, where social workers decide to get involved and tell parents that they're being neglectful with regard to their children because they simply allow their children to play in a park by themselves. They go to ride their bike by themselves to the store. I mean, isn't that what we're talking about? Isn't that sort of the source of the problem of why you had to come out with this legislation?
Yeah, that's basically it. Utah's law regarding child abuse and neglect is a lot like the laws in all the other states, which is abuse and neglect are illegal, but they're not really defined. And so they leave that up, to government bureaucrats or government agencies to interpret what that means. And far too many across the country, including in California, have interpreted that to mean if you ever leave your child unsupervised, you are neglecting them.
Yeah.
And that means that, we're not allowing kids to experience childhood, to,
right.
To go out and explore the world and figure out what it means to solve problems or what it means to skin your knee.
Right.
And I wanted to make sure that Utah parents were specifically protected in law to give their kids a measure of independence so that they can learn those things and then, take those skills with them into adulthood.
Right. And I want people to understand the craziness of what we're dealing with in so many states that Utah was dealing with when this became law. I remember when I was a kid, I rode my bike down to the grocery store with a friend of mine. We bought candy. Okay, I confess, we bought candy. And we'd drive it. We'd ride our bikes to the school after hours in the park next to the school and do all kinds of stuff, play frisbee, whatever. We had that freedom, and yet the literal language of abuse and neglect by just about every state in the country says that if parents aren't supervising their kids, if they're not with their minor child under the age of 18, then it could be qualified as abuse and neglect. And abuse and neglect it can be grounds to have children permanently taken and removed from that family and put in with some other family with potentially beliefs and values and religious convictions very different from the family. So that's how serious this is and what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, that's right. Natasha Felix, for example, in Illinois, she let her two sons go play at a park near the house. She could see them from the kitchen window. They played there for a little bit. Eventually, someone saw the kids, apparently unsupervised, called the cops. They come knocking at her door. She's arrested. Her kids are taken out of her custody. She is placed on the Illinois Child Abuse Registry,
right,
which kept her even from volunteering at her kids' school. And it was a period of 2 years until that all worked out.
2 years.
Thousands.
Yeah, 2 years of
Thousands
trauma.
of dollars in legal expenses. Yeah, it's horrible.
Yeah, 2 years of trauma to children being separated from their mom that loves them so much, put with strangers. 2 years of unnecessary child abuse for something that was not child abuse to begin with. So it is very widespread, and it opens a door for social workers to intimidate, to harass, but even worse, to take children. Even if it's just over the weekend, that's trauma. That's emotional trauma to children to be taken from parents. Oftentimes they're strip searched by strangers who aren't even doctors. So we see this at Pacific Justice Institute all across the country. And in fact, that's one reason why on our website we have an article, the 12 steps to protect your children from social workers or child protective services, because there is such abuse and massive taking advantage of legislation by social workers in states all across the country. Now, what's been the feedback from people in Utah since this became law? This just recently passed.
Yeah, we passed it earlier this month, so it passed in February. It was signed by the governor in March. The response has been overwhelmingly positive. And I want to give credit to our Department of Child and Family Services here. I worked with them in crafting this legislation. I think we came out with what is a really good model that other states in the country can do. And that is that we took the definition of neglect and we simply defined out certain things, right? Like allowing your kids to engage in independent activities, specifically playing at a park, walking or riding a bike to school, going to the mall, the things like that, that you and I talked about, kind of a normal part of childhood.
Right.
We just exempted those things out specifically from the definition of neglect, so that when parents let their kid run to the store, to pick up a pound of butter that we need tonight, that's okay. They don't need to worry about getting a knock on the door from the police department when that happens. And because of that, the most common response I get is that, why is this common sense law even necessary to have as a law at all? Right. But then you could just send people links to all the stories from all across the country of parents from California and Maryland and Connecticut and Illinois and others,
Virginia,
who have just really, it knows no geographic boundary, no class boundary, no racial boundary. It simply is a matter of parents wanting their kids to get some independent time,
right?
Because that's the best way for kids to learn, right? A kid is never going to learn how to deal with a skinned knee if he never is able to skin his knee. And they're never going to learn how to interact with people unless they interact with people. And so I just wanted to make sure that we gave specific parents, and I hope that California and other states will latch onto this idea that you can just exempt out specific things from neglect. You can do it without endangering kids, without letting actual child abusers and parents who actually do neglect their kids get around the law, just by exempting out specific things. Right.
Now, Utah is clearly what I call a red state, a very red state. And I'm very pleased to see them adopt this legislation. While I think it's going to be difficult to get states like California, Illinois, New York, Massachusetts to jump on this immediately, I see no reason why states like Texas and Georgia and states that are looked upon as red states, that are parent sensitive, more tolerant towards parents' rights. There's no reason they shouldn't jump on this. And
that's absolutely right.
Have you heard anything yet? Anyone from another state legislature, a legislative representative? No, it's a legislator. Excuse me. Have you heard any legislators from other states contact your office, asking about this legislation?
Yes, yeah, and we work with some public policy interest groups here, and so we've been in contact with at least a half dozen other states at this point who are interested in this idea. They've seen media coverage out about it, and we'll be excited to help them go.
Excellent, excellent. I know we at Pacific Justice Institute have also adopted a model legislation for all 50 states on increasing the due process protection of children against social workers. It's another angle of dealing with these kinds of things, and I strongly encourage people to contact us at Pacific Justice Institute or go to our website if you'd like that kind of information to make available to your legislator in your state as well. But what you're doing, what you've done, Representative Lincoln Fillmore, is exemplary. Hats off to you for your fine work. And I just encourage people out there to take advantage of this opportunity to follow what you've done there in the state of Utah on behalf of parents and children. So keep up the great work.
Thanks a lot, Brad.
Very good. So, folks, there you have it. It's our God-given freedoms we're talking about. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Brad Dacus with Pacific Justice Institute. Have a great weekend.
So on June 7th, I went to pick up my daughter from kindergarten, and she ran up to me and said that her friend was no longer a boy, he was now a girl, and that he had a new girl name. Went home, asked my daughter about it. I looked up the book on YouTube. My daughter told me the name of the book. It was I Am Jazz. So we watched the book being read, and we found out that she had been taught what transgenderism is. He had come to school dressed as a boy. The teacher had read the book, and afterwards he went into the bathroom, which was in the classroom. He went into the bathroom, changed into a dress, and came out. He was then announced as his new girl name, and the class was told that he was now a girl. For my daughter, having that book read and then seeing her little friend that she had known since preschool go into a bathroom, change clothes, and come out, in her 5-year-old brain, she thought, oh my goodness, all I have to do to change into a boy is to change my clothes. My daughter was taking a bath, and she got up out of the water, and her hair was slicked back, and she saw a reflection of herself. And she started crying and shaking, and she was like, Mommy, I turned into a boy. I don't want to be a boy. And she was scared. She was really concerned about what she was wearing or how she looked. There were other kids in the class that were afraid that their blood could turn into boy blood. Another little boy went home, and his mom had to have the entire sex talk with him about body parts. It was very confusing. And again, the parents had no idea what had been taught in class. So they were all exposed to this highly controversial sexual topic without having any, without even thinking about their own sexuality yet. There were members of the LGBT community that were actually transgender that came up to us and said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that happened. And I stand with you, and I'm for parental rights. And that wasn't right what happened, and I'm so sorry that got taught to them. And that to me was just so amazing, because the point of it was I was protecting my daughter and the other kids in that class, because they all have the right to be protected, all of them. And so it was actually really beautiful. I loved working with the Pacific Justice Institute because I felt like they had my same heart. It wasn't about like fear or judgment or anything. It was like, hey, let's like support you and help you through this, and let's fight for the rights for everybody. It was never about hate or anything, which made it super easy. I would totally recommend Pacific Justice Institute if you have something that happened at your school, if you have legal questions. Don't be afraid to stand up for what's right and to protect your kids.
When we heard about this situation at Rockland Academy, we got involved right away. We gave counsel to the parents on what the law did or didn't say, and we drafted a model policy for the charter school to adopt. Now, unfortunately, the school refused to apologize to the parents for the lack of communication, and they also refused to give a strong assurance to the parents that they would receive prior notice or that they would have the opportunity to opt their children out of similar circumstances in the future. If you ever have trouble with your school teaching your child something that you feel is not appropriate for your child, don't hesitate to give us a call or go to our website, pji.org. We're here to help. If you'd like to support the work of the Pacific Justice Institute on either a one-time or a monthly basis, we have a gift for you, and it's very timely. It's called 12 Steps to Protect Your Children from CPS, or Child Protective Services. So it helps you know exactly what you need to do preemptively to prevent your children from being taken, possibly permanently, by zealous social workers anywhere in the United States. This is very, very important. We just heard from a legislator from the state of Utah about legislation that they had to adopt because of the zeal of social workers wrongfully taking children. Well, this is our gift to you, If you go to our website, it's pji.org, P for Pacific, J for Justice, I for Institute, pji.org. This is something that every parent, every grandparent, they should have this to be able to protect their children and their grandchildren from zealous social workers all throughout the United States. We highly recommend this. And of course, we are very appreciative of those of you who choose to support the Pacific Justice Institute on either a one-time or a monthly basis. Your support is tax deductible. It's greatly appreciated. That's how we're able to do our work without charge, is because of people out there like you who choose to become a part of the PGI team. We have with us on the line one of our attorneys, Matt McReynolds, to update us on something very important dealing with legislation which could really be horrific for the rights of homeschoolers, not just in California, but eventually this could impact people in states all across the United States if other states decide to take this path. Matt, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Brad. Great to be on.
Now, Matt, tell us about this legislation. I know originally it was going to allow fire marshals or fire chiefs to just invade homes of homeschoolers without any notice, any warrant, twice a year, just to inspect to see if they can find something wrong or unsafe about a homeschooling family. That was taken off the legislation. I know we stood up against that, and then I know you and others testified against this bill, but it's still ugly. Tell us how.
That's right, Brad. We've seen the latest twist in this saga. It seems every few years we have these major challenges to homeschooling and to educational choice, and this is really gotten our attention here at Pacific Justice Institute. What we're talking about is Assembly Bill 2926, and what it does is it takes an approach that we could see replicated in other states where, incredibly, Brad, our state lawmakers believe that what our schools most need in a time when so many families are questioning their safety, their liability, their achievement, is more mandates, more regulation, and to try to drag parents who've exercised their homeschooling option back into unsafe and failing public schools. The mindset is just astounding, but that's what we're confronting.
Okay,
here
you're
in
saying
Sacramento.
so basically the obvious goal of this is to intimidate homeschoolers so that they don't want to get in trouble, they don't want social workers to come, they don't want to be focused, the target of the government, so they'll put their kids back into these public schools, which statistically have been failures on a massive scale in the United States, but also in the state of California. Now, you have some that aren't as bad as others. I know some friends of mine who teach in some of these better public schools. But as a general rule, they are losing. They are losers in terms of academics, in terms of safety, in terms of teenage pregnancy, drug abuse, dropout, violence, you name it. And yet, the purpose of this, we believe, is to threaten homeschoolers, to intimidate them, to put their kids back into these inferior institutions called public education. How are they doing that? What does this bill actually entail that could cause this intimidation to really be a real threat?
Well, three things, Brad. What AB 2926 proposes to do is to set up a new state bureaucratic advisory committee that would consider a whole range of new requirements on homeschoolers in three areas in particular. Number one is health and safety inspections of homes where homeschoolers live. Number two is specific content standards for curriculum that homeschoolers use. And number three is credentialing or certification of parents, basically the notion that they need the government to license them in order to teach their own children.
Even though statistically, those parents out there who are homeschooled are doing a superior job academically, indisputably, than children not only in public schools, but also children in private schools. So parents who are willing to spend the time and do it statistically are overwhelmingly, conclusively doing a better job. They want to start getting involved in making them credentialed teachers like those in the public schools who are doing a failure of a job in so many cases. So let's go talk about the first one, Matt, real quick for sake of time. They want to have health and safety regulations potentially. That's what this committee is being formed to come up with requirements. Why do families of homeschoolers, here's the big question, why do their homes need to have health and safety inspections while families who put their kids in public schools, their homes don't need health and safety inspections? Is this an implied bigotry that somehow homeschooling families are more dangerous and not providing for the health and safety of their kids? Isn't that really the blatant discrimination, the bigotry that is implicit in this suggested part of this legislation?
Sure, and I think it comes from some real misconceptions as well, Brad.
Oh, yes.
What we've heard throughout this legislative process is that they want to justify all of these new potential regulations based on one or two isolated incidents that have been reported in the media and try to apply that as though that's something that characterizes homeschoolers in general. When, any subgroup has its outliers, has, one or two weird things that don't justify massive state regulation that we know doesn't fix even the problems they claim to be trying to solve.
Right. And we know if statistically children who attend public universities are more likely to suffer abuse, more likely to not be fed or given a healthy diet, and we know that, then arguably they should start with their own people first and apply this intrusive government bureaucratic control for parents who have children in public schools before they start with the homeschoolers. But they're not. This isn't logical. It's not about logic. It's about using a couple isolated incidents, use that fear, play that fear, put intellect and logic and reasoning at the door, and try to adopt this first provision. It makes no sense, and anyone with any kind of rational thinking should be totally against it. It's government using its control and power of intimidation. What about the second criteria here we're dealing with? Talk about that and why it doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. Well, the specific curriculum requirements that the state is suggesting need to be imposed on homeschoolers are exactly the reason why so many families are fleeing the public schools. The ideology, the indoctrination that comes down from the top.
Right.
So many families have been fed up with that. That's exactly why they're pulling out and want to get back to the basics, want to make sure their kids are being educated and not indoctrinated.
Right. And the textbooks being utilized, they could mandate that state textbooks have to be used. Well, every state textbook in California by law has to have historical icons and role models from the LGBTQ group. So, I mean, do parents really want that to be mandated to homeschoolers when one of the reasons many homeschool is because that agenda violates what they believe is best and right for their children in accordance with their own beliefs? Obviously, the answer is no. They shouldn't be allowed to do that, required to do that. So that's what they're wanting to do. They also want to start dictating what parents are to teach and to instruct. Now, as I understand it, parents who homeschool in California, they file a private school affidavit. They are required to make sure that they are teaching the basic subjects: reading, math, science, history. So it's not like people can just homeschool and just do nothing and just say, yeah, we're just going to have our children play with their blocks all day till they graduate from our supposed homeschool high school, right?
You're absolutely right, Brad. The private school affidavit is one way that the state already is regulating homeschoolers. And so to just increase some of these mindless mandates has no demonstrated benefit to anybody.
Right, exactly. And there's, by the way, there's wonderful resources for homeschoolers. If I encourage you to look at your state organization for homeschooling. They're very, very supportive of incredible resources that are out there in terms of curriculum. I know in California, there's CHIA, California Home Educators Association. They do a fantastic job providing all kinds of potential resources for instruction. Real quick, what about the third requirement dealing with potentially mandating that any mom or dad homeschooling has to be a credentialed teacher. They have to have the rubber stamp of the state. How's that rationalized here?
Well, I haven't heard the specific rationale for it, Brad. It just seems like a top-down mandate.
Right.
The state has this notion, without any necessary evidence, that credentialing somehow leads to better outcomes for students.
Well, we know in public schools, the teachers have to be credentialed. We know public schools have failed massively. And that's why parents have their kids in private schools or homeschooled, or even some charter schools are given more leeway. But it's still very problematic. This is intimidation. And the fact is, we at Pacific Justice Institute, just a few years ago, we defended the rights of homeschoolers not to have to be credentialed teachers. We won in an appellate court decision. The state Supreme Court allowed that to stand. And now, once again, we see the activists, I think from the teachers' unions and places like that, coming in, trying to force parents who are homeschooling to put their kids back into public schools. And folks, those in public schools really have a tough time. It is more difficult, I think, being a teacher in public education than at any time in the state's history, particularly if you're a teacher that's really working hard. There are some teachers out there that I know of in public schools working their tails off, working really hard to try to help kids in their education, yet they've got all these bureaucratic mandates from the state, from the government, impeding on their ability to do their job. Folks, we need to get behind those teachers. We need to support those teachers as they're working hard to do their job to help these students. At the same time, we also need to work hard to maintain the freedom and liberty of parents throughout the nation to be able to homeschool their children. Parents have a fundamental right over the education and upbringing of their children. The case law says it. The Supreme Court said it. Now it's time for our legislators to hear it. Matt, thank you so much for being on the program. Keep up the great work.
Thanks, Brad.
So, folks, there you have it. It's our God-given freedoms we're talking about. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Brad Dacus with Pacific Justice Institute.